This is not breaking news. This is not a scandal. This is not about one person. Nothing is on fire. Nothing is collapsing. Nothing looks wrong. In fact, everything looks fine. Numbers look calm. Markets look confident. Paychecks feel a little heavier. Gas prices feel survivable. And that is precisely the danger, because the most destabilizing failures in modern history never announce themselves. They whisper, they borrow time, they let everyone relax. What you are seeing right now is not stability. It is suspension, a system being held up by forces you cannot see. Costs that have not arrived yet. Decisions whose consequences have been delayed, not erased. The clock is already running. You just haven't been told when it started. Stay with me. Because once you see what's underneath this calm surface, you won't be able to unsee it. And if you care about what happens next, this is the moment you don't look away. This story only moves forward from here. The mistake most people make is assuming this system is still driven by leadership, by speeches, by elections, by personalities at the top. It isn't. What controls the economy right now is not who's in charge. It's what has already been set in motion. Markets don't respond to intent. They respond to incentives, constraints, and expectations. And once those expectations shift, they don't wait for permission to move. Right now, the system is being governed by three invisible forces: deferred costs, compressed time, and credibility under strain. Deferred costs mean pain that hasn't shown up on your receipt yet. Compressed time means decisions that normally unfold over a decade are being forced into a year. And credibility, once cracked, doesn't bend. It snaps. This is why the surface feels calm, because the machinery underneath is still running, still absorbing pressure, still pretending this is sustainable. But systems don't fail when they're weak. They fail when they are asked to keep performing past their limits. And we are closer to that limit than the headlines suggest. Because the shift didn't happen overnight. It happened quietly. And that's what makes it dangerous. For a long time, the American economy worked on a simple assumption. Change would be gradual. Adjustments would be slow. Shocks would be external. Before, when something broke, you could see it: a housing bubble, a virus, a banking collapse. There was a moment you could point to and say, there, that's when it started. That's not how this one works. This shift didn't arrive with alarms. It arrived through normalization, through policies that felt temporary, through decisions that were framed as reversible, through the quiet idea that today's strength could always pay for tomorrow's risk. Before, costs showed up quickly. Now they're deferred. Before, pressure released in cycles. Now it's being stored. That's the dangerous part. Slow change doesn't trigger fear. It triggers adaptation. People adjust their expectations downward without realizing it. Businesses absorb losses instead of passing them on. Markets assume someone will step in. And while everyone adjusts, the system drifts further from balance. Nothing snaps yet. Nothing breaks, which is exactly why almost no one is watching. But something did happen. A moment small enough to miss, and once you see it, you can't unsee what came next. The shock didn't arrive as a collapse. It arrived as a test. A single policy decision, public, intentional, and large enough to move trillions of dollars in hours. Within 2 days, $5 trillion in market value vanished. Not from a war, not from a disaster, from math reacting to uncertainty. Indexes fell fast. Confidence cracked. And then something unusual happened. The system recovered. Prices rebounded. Losses reversed. Records were broken again. That recovery became the story. Proof, we were told, that nothing fundamental had changed. That the system could absorb anything. But this wasn't resilience. It was absorption. Companies swallowed costs instead of passing them on. Markets priced in hope instead of fundamentals. Inventory built under old rules, kept shelves full under new ones. This wasn't the end of the shock. It was the delay. Because when a system absorbs damage instead of resolving it, the pressure doesn't disappear. It concentrates And what looked like strength was actually a warning, one most people misread. If this feels reassuring so far, pause, stay with me, because this was only the symptom. The mechanism comes next. Here's what actually changed. Not the headlines, not the rhetoric, the flow of pressure inside the system. When costs rise suddenly, a healthy system does one of two things. It passes them through or it slows down. This system did neither. Instead, companies absorbed the damage. Margins shrank. Inventory was sold at yesterday's prices. Labor shortages were patched over with overtime and delay. Debt filled the gaps where revenue no longer reached. That's the hidden mechanism. Cost absorption as a temporary anesthetic. On paper, inflation stays low. Consumers feel fine. Markets stay optimistic. But absorption has a limit. Margins hit zero. Inventory runs out. Debt demands interest. And when that happens, the costs don't arrive gradually. They arrive all at once. This is who benefits in the meantime: stockholders, short-term revenue, political narratives of strength. And this is who absorbs the damage. Businesses that can't raise prices yet, workers whose job growth quietly stalls, households living off numbers that haven't updated to reality. The system looks stable because the bill hasn't been delivered. But it's already been written, and it's coming due faster than anyone admits. Now the pace changes, because once absorption reaches its limit, systems don't glide. They lurch. Inventory thins. Margins disappear. Hiring freezes quietly replace expansion plans. Companies stop asking, how do we grow, and start asking, how long can we hold? At the same time, the labor pool tightens. Fewer workers, higher costs, more pressure per hour. Prices don't jump yet. They hesitate, they wobble. And behind that hesitation, expectations shift. Investors start demanding higher returns for the same risk. Lenders shorten timelines. Cash stops moving. This is how acceleration begins. Not with panic, with restraint. The system starts conserving energy, waiting for clarity that never arrives. And here's the part almost no one notices in real time. When growth slows quietly, unemployment doesn't spike. Job creation simply disappears. Numbers still look acceptable, but momentum is gone. This is the moment before a turn. The moment when everything still works, just more slowly than before. And when a system loses momentum under pressure, it doesn't stop gently. It snaps forward. This is where it reaches you, not as a headline, not as a crash, as a quiet change in how life feels. You notice it when prices stop making sense, when temporary fees don't disappear, when the promotion that felt inevitable doesn't happen. You notice it when companies stop hiring and start waiting, when job postings stay up, but no one calls back, when stability starts to feel conditional. If you're retired or close to it, the fear is different. It's not about today. It's about the rules changing after you planned your whole life around them. You did everything right, saved, worked, followed the math, and now you're being told quietly that the math may be changing. This is the human cost of deferred decisions. Anxiety without explanation, risk without warning. If this feels familiar, there's a reason you've lived through versions of this before. Stay here. Pay attention. Because what happens next doesn't stay personal. It spreads. And once it does, there's no pulling it back. Once the pressure moves beyond households, it doesn't respect borders. Trade partners adjust, supply chains reroute, capital looks for certainty elsewhere. What began as a domestic experiment becomes a global signal. When rules change without warning, allies hesitate. When policy reverses under pressure, confidence erodes. And when credibility weakens, it doesn't do so selectively. Currencies react first. Bond markets follow. Long-term investment slows everywhere, touched by the uncertainty. This is no longer about prices on a shelf. It's about trust in the system that sets those prices. Other economies start planning around instability rather than partnership. Factories get built, but not always where they were intended. Deals become shorter, commitments become conditional. And once that shift happens, it's hard to reverse. Global systems remember volatility. What's forming now isn't a crisis yet. It's a pattern. One that doesn't resolve itself quietly. One that feeds back into the system that created it. And as that feedback loop tightens, the future stops being abstract. It becomes immediate because the next phase doesn't come from outside. It comes from what the system does next. From here, the future splits. Not into predictions, into paths. The first path is adjustment. Costs surface slowly. Prices rise, but predictably, institutions regain credibility just enough to steady expectations. Growth weakens, but the system holds. This path requires discipline and time and restraint under pressure. The second path is erosion. Nothing breaks outright. Instead, confidence leaks away. Investment slows. Job creation never recovers. Inflation stays just high enough to hurt, just low enough to ignore. Living standards flatten. The economy keeps moving, but heavier, duller, less responsive. Then there's the third path, rupture. This is what happens when delayed costs arrive together, when inflation expectations reset abruptly, when borrowing costs spike faster than incomes can adjust, when credibility breaks. Instead of bending, this path doesn't announce itself either. It accelerates. The difference between erosion and rupture isn't ideology. It's timing. And whether the system is forced to absorb one more shock while already off balance, which path we take hasn't been decided. But the window to choose is narrowing. And the next move matters more than the last 10 combined. If you were waiting for a clean ending, there isn't one. Because systems like this don't resolve. They reveal what looks stable today is still being propped up by assumptions that haven't been tested yet. Costs that haven't arrived, expectations that haven't reset. The danger isn't that something goes wrong. It's that too much already has, and we're only just starting to feel it. You're not being asked to panic. You're being asked to pay attention, to question why strength feels fragile, why confidence depends on delays, why the calm requires so much effort to maintain. This isn't a warning about collapse. It's a warning about momentum. Once it turns, it doesn't ask permission. If you want to understand what comes next, you can't stop at outcomes. You have to follow the mechanics. The incentives, the pressure points, that's what this was about. And this isn't the end of the story. It's the edge of it, because the next phase doesn't belong to predictions. It belongs to consequences. And we're already closer than we think. If you want to go deeper into what breaks first and why, stay with me.